Ladies and gentlemen, good evening or good morning, whichever is the case. My talk today is on tiaras, which I find fascinating and I hope you will too. Now, one's tiara is not something one normally takes on a cruise, I will admit. However, recently I gave a talk to a distinguished audience on an auspicious occasion, and they were all wearing not tiaras, but crowns. It was, of course, Christmas, and they were paper crowns. So let's come on to tiaras. Tiara is a Latin word, comes from the Latin, and originally it signified a head ornament worn by men, both men and women, in the ancient world, in ancient Greece and in Rome at the time of the Roman Empire. And there is a Roman lady wearing such a tiara. They were usually made of beaten gold in the form of foliage or even flowers, and they went all round the head. There she is. Now, there was a decline in tiaras with the decline of the Roman Empire, and they went out of use and fashion. And there was not a revival until much later in the end of the 18th and the beginning of the 19th century. And then it was only as a head ornament for women, and usually bejeweled. The man largely responsible for this was Napoleon. Napoleon and his wife, the Empress Josephine de Beauharnais. Napoleon wanted his court to be the grandest in Europe, and he showered Josephine with jewels, including several magnificent tiaras. Recently, in recent years, I have seen Josephine's tiara, the one that she wore for Napoleon's coronation. And it may still be where I saw it. It used to be on show in Tiffany's, in the window of Tiffany's in New York. You could see it there. Now, to give you some idea of what tiaras at that time, in the late 18th, early 19th century, looked like, here is a picture of one, a very beautiful one, in emeralds and diamonds. It was made a little later than Napoleon, 1820, made in France, and it was made for the Duchess of Angoulême. Who was the Duchess of Angoulême? She was the eldest daughter of the ill-fated Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, and she was the only one of that unhappy family to survive the French Revolution and the Reign of Terror. She was imprisoned but later released. And with the restoration of the Bourbon monarchy, she married her cousin, the Duke of Angoulême, who was the son of the last Bourbon king of France, who was Charles X. Charles X abdicated for himself and for his son, and the Angoulêmes left France to live in England. They lived in Hartwell in Hertfordshire, and she left the tiara behind, apparently. It is now in the Louvre, where you can go and see it. Tiaras today are mainly worn by royalty, queens, princesses, empresses, if there is one left. Actually, there is. Farah, the Empress of Iran. Anyway, queens and princesses wear tiaras for social and state occasions, usually in the evenings. The Swedish royal family, Swedish monarchy, has a magnificent collection, as do the Dutch, the Danes, and the Spanish. But I think the most valuable, and certainly one of the most impressive, is the collection in the hands of the British royal family. Tonight I'm just going to talk about 4 tiaras. all of which have royal connections, two of which belong to Her Majesty the Queen. And I shall also be talking about two remarkable but very different women who wore these tiaras. And in the picture also is one shadowy Englishman who managed to spirit out of revolutionary Russia jewels which today are worth not only millions, but tens of millions, maybe more. Now, the first of these ladies, there she is, was called Maria Povlovna. She was the Grand Duchess Maria Povlovna, not a lady that you would argue with. She was not, in fact, Russian, she was German. She came from the princely house of Mecklenburg-Schwerin, and she married Vladimir, who was the brother of the then Tsar, Alexander III, the penultimate Tsar, and she therefore became aunt to the last, by marriage, to the last Tsar of Russia, Nicholas. Incidentally, just in passing, Mecklenburg-Schwerin gave another princess who became a queen, and that was Charlotte, the wife of Queen Charlotte, the wife of George III. She also came from Mecklenburg-Schwerin. Maria Pavlovna in the photograph is wearing a quite magnificent sapphire and diamond tiara, which she had made by Cartier in 1909. It's based on the Russian headdress, the kokoshinik, and it has in it sapphires which already belonged to the Romanov family. They belonged originally to the wife, the Tsarina, who was wife of Nicholas I, Alexandra Feodorovna, and they passed down. Maria got them and had them made in this tiara. The largest one in the center is 137 carats, and the other 6 cabochon sapphires. Cabochon, by the way, means smooth, not faceted. The other 6 each weigh about 100 carats, and actually weigh 102 carats. I'll digress for a moment because you may not know what is a carat. A carat is a unit of measurement for weighing gemstones. It differs from carat as applying to gold, which has to do with the quality of the gold, and is usually spelled with a K. Our carat is spelled with a C, and originally a carat was a seed. It was the seed of the carob tree, and in ancient times around the Mediterranean basin and in the east, these seeds were used to weigh gemstones. Now this may seem a very haphazard way of weighing a gemstone, but in fact the carob seeds are surprisingly uniform. They have now, the weight has now been established as being, because they're weighed now by machinery, by weighing machines. A carat is 0.197 of a gram. That means virtually that 5 carats is 5 grams. That is established now, but that's the origin of the word carat. And we come now to Maria's other fabulous tiara. She has many more, but other fabulous tiara, the Vladimir pearl tiara. It was made in 1874 by the Russian court jeweler Bolin. Undoubtedly, that was the year of her marriage, so undoubtedly it was a wedding present from probably her husband. As you can see, it is 15 interlaced circles of diamonds, and they're looped together at the top, I don't know whether you can see, by a diamond ribbon, and in each circle there hangs a flawless pear-shaped pearl, which are articulated. They move with the wearer. I shall be talking about that tiara later on. Now, Maria Pavlovna became a leading hostess in pre-revolutionary St. Petersburg. One of the reasons, she had the money to be, and I'll explain to you that later, but one of the reasons was that the Tsarina Alexandra, also a German princess, was one shy and therefore gave the impression of being reserved and aloof, and because of her shyness tried to avoid social occasions. So, and also she was hugely unpopular. Maria Pavlovna didn't like her to begin with. So the Grand Duchess became a leader of society, and the other one was the Dowager, Tsarina, who also held court. Maria Pavlovna's husband died. He was older than she. He died in 1909. And he left her a very, very wealthy woman. She not only had his pension as a member of the House of Romanov, but she had the Vladimir Palace, she had estates, including the Northern Caucasus. And more than that, she had his pension. He was commander-in-chief of the Russian army. He was a general. And he had a pension, which he inherited, of an annual amount of 1 million gold francs. Now, I must be honest with you, I'm not really sure of the value of a gold franc then, or its equivalent value today. But as you may imagine, 1 million of them would amount to a very considerable sum. And this, to Maria Pavlovna, was her pocket money. She spent it lavishly at Cartier. She loved jewels. She was their best customer. She would go often to Paris, or they would come to her. She persuaded Cartier to open a branch in St. Petersburg for the winter season, which they did in 1909 and continued to do right up until the war, the Great War. So there she was. And just let me add, she was not a frivolous woman. Okay, she gave great parties and she loved jewels, etc. She was a highly intelligent woman, politically very astute. She was very ambitious. She was very aware of what was going on in Russia under the weak Nicholas and his overbearing wife. And then came the revolution. So what does Maria Pavlovna do? She locks up all her jewelry in the Vladimir Palace in a safe of German manufacture with a very complicated access. And then she flees across Russia to the safety of her estates in the Northern Caucasus. And, being the lady she was, she travelled there in her private train. Now, on the scene, he's already there, but I'm mentioning him for the first time, comes somebody called Bertie Stopford. Who was Bertie Stopford? He was an elegant Edwardian man about town. He was actually the son of a clergyman, but not any old clergyman. His father had been royal chaplain to Queen Victoria, then to Edward VII, and finally to George V. So young Bertie, because of his father's court connections, had managed to climb up the ladder of Edwardian society. And by the time we know him, he is a man about town. He knows all the leading society hostesses. They know him. He's a great dancer. He's famous as a leader of cotillions. And he lives in Greville. He dabbles in antiques, objets by Cartier and by Fabergé, and he deals in these, and he travels backwards and forwards between London and St. Petersburg. On one of his visits to St. Petersburg, he meets and is befriended by Prince Felix Yusupov. Yusupov was the heir to the largest fortune, by far the largest fortune in Russia. His mother, Zenaide, was in fact the heiress, and he was going to inherit. His brother had been killed in a duel. He was the only one. A rather exotic young man, very beautiful, married to a niece of the Tsar, Irina, the daughter of Xenia, sister of Nicholas, and to subsequently become more famous, or shall I say notorious, as the man who fired the revolver that killed Rasputin. Anyway, through Yusupov, Bertie met and was befriended by Maria Povlovna, and they seem to have known each other really quite well. Bertie by that time was actually living in St. Petersburg. He lived there between 1915 and September 1917. Perhaps it is at that time that he was thought to have been a British agent. I can find no evidence that indeed he was, but he may well have been. He was well connected on both sides. He travelled backwards and forwards. He could have carried letters. He certainly carried jewels at some stage or another. Anyway, there he was. And he made two railway journeys across war-torn Russia. They took 4 days to visit the Grand Duchess in the Northern Caucasus. He must have stood out a bit like a sore thumb, because he would have been, I doubt that he spoke Russian. Members of the Russian aristocracy at that time spoke French amongst themselves. He would have been wearing Savile Row or English tweeds. He must have stood out extraordinarily. But go he did, and on the second visit in 1917, by then the Duchess was short of the ready. All her jewels were looked up, but she was short of the ready cash, and he took rubles for her, stuffed in his boots. He took the precaution of taking the new rubles that had been issued by the provisional government, and which, of course, she didn't at first recognize. Anyway, she must have trusted him implicitly, because on that second visit, she revealed to him where her jewels were, what they were, and, more importantly, how to open this German safe. So Bertie went back to St. Petersburg, and with her second son, Maria had 3 sons and a daughter. I'll be talking about them later. With her second son, Boris, both of them disguised in overalls, they got into the Vladimir Palace through a side entrance, let in by a servant loyal to the family, and made their way through that vast palace to the Grand Duchess's bedroom, found the safe, opened it. Bertie was carrying 2 leather Gladstone bags. For those of you who don't know what a Gladstone bag looks like, it was usually carried by doctors. It's a sausage-shaped bag, about that size, fastens at the top with a handle, leather. He had 2 of these, and together they took out of the safe 244 pieces of jewellery, including the 2 magnificent tiaras which you've seen, wrapped them all up in newspaper and put them in the Gladstone bags. Then Bertie, and Bertie alone, in an act of great courage and bravery, carried them out of Russia at tremendous risk, because had he been stopped and searched, he would have been arrested, probably shot on the spot as a looter, looter, and the jewels would have disappeared. But they didn't. He managed to get them out to Sweden. From Sweden he took a boat to Aberdeen, a train to London, and once in London the jewels were deposited in a bank vault. And no doubt the Duchess was informed, circuitously perhaps, that her jewels were safe. I'll just stay with Bertie for a moment. He not only took jewels out for Maria Povlovna, he took them out for other noble families, notably the Oblenskys, and he must, if one takes the value of those jewels today, he must have transported not just millions of pounds worth of jewellery, but tens of millions, maybe even more. To give you some idea, the Vladimir tiara, now in the possession of the Queen, is thought to be worth in excess of £2 million. That gives you some measure. It's interesting that he does not appear to have benefited financially from all of this. He died in Paris in 1939 in relative penury, and he left just £930. But let's go back to 1917. Bertie is back in London, relieved from the tensions of living in St. Petersburg. It's a bit of a loose end. He gets into trouble. Bertie's problem was that he liked guardsmen. And he became involved with a guardsman, embroiled in a homosexual scandal, was arrested and tried with one other at Old Bailey, and sentenced to 1 year's imprisonment in Wormwood Scrubs. Of course, all his English friends and acquaintances dropped him. You must remember, it was not many years since Oscar Wilde's trial and scandal that ensued. They dropped him, but not so the Russians. They remained loyal. And in fact, when he came out of Wormwood Scrubs, waiting for him was a prince, Prince Serge Oblensky, who, as I say, he'd helped his family with jewels. Now we leave Bertie and we go back to the Grand Duchess. She's still in the Northern Caucasus. It's the beginning of 1920. She's refusing to leave. Why? Well, as I told you, she was a very astute and intelligent woman, and a very ambitious one. She would have known that the Tsar had abdicated not only for himself but for his son. She probably would not have known of the tragedy of Ekaterinburg when they were all slaughtered. But she was hoping that her son, her eldest son, Cyril, might become the head of the Romanov dynasty. And therefore, should the monarchy be restored, Tsar. And you must remember, this is 1920, war-torn Russia. There's a civil war going on in the middle between the Reds and the Whites. The Bolsheviks have a tenuous hold. They don't control the whole of the country. There are whole areas which they don't. It could have swung either way. But, however, she was persuaded early in 1920 by a white Russian general that, in fact, the Whites had lost and she really ought to leave. So she did. Again, dear lady, she didn't have her private train, but she had 2 coaches left. They were hers, little battered perhaps, but she had them hitched to a local locomotive, and she got in them with members of her family and was choo-chooed to the nearest port, where she boarded an Italian vessel bound for Venice. When she arrived in Venice, who was waiting on the quayside with others but Bertie Stopford? And the Grand Duchess proceeds from there to her house in Paris, near Paris at Contrexeville. At least, I think she had a house at Contrexeville. She also had a favourite hotel there, which she often stayed in. But anyway, it was in Contractsfield, where unfortunately 6 months later she died. She'd had an abscess on her kidneys. She had to have an operation. Wasn't totally successful. And the poor old duck, she wasn't very old, she was 66, died. Perhaps from the deprivations that she'd suffered, I don't know. But of course, then her jewels were divided up between her 4 children. She didn't leave them equally. She left the lion's share, the major share, to her daughter Helen, who was married to Prince Nicholas of Greece, and who incidentally had 3 daughters, one of whom, Marina, was to become a much-loved member of the British royal family when she married Prince George, Duke of Kent, younger son of George V. Now, Elena got the diamonds and the pearls. I think Cyril the eldest got the emeralds, Boris got the sapphires, and Andre got the rubies. He certainly didn't get all the rubies because Helen left rubies which had belonged to her mother in her will to Queen Frederica of Greece, who wore them, and they have been worn also by the wife of Constantine, King Constantine. But anyway. Now, we know what happened to the sapphire tiara. It was sold, I'm not sure by who, it could have been by Boris or it could have been by Helen, but anyway, it was sold to Queen Maria of Romania. Queen Maria of Romania, known as the Queen Mother of the Balkans, because one of her daughters was Queen of Greece and another one was Queen of Yugoslavia. She bought it and wore it at the coronation of her husband and her coronation in 1922. She gave it as a gift to her youngest daughter, Elena, when Elena married an Austrian archduke. Then came the war, and the end of the war, Maria herself was dead by then, and the Romanian monarchy ceased to exist, in Romania at any rate. And Elena and her Austrian husband left with their family for a new life in Argentina. They took the tiara with them, where it was pawned, and the money used to invest in a business venture, which unfortunately failed. So they decided to leave Argentina and go to the United States. They redeemed the tiara, and Elena put it in her hand baggage, wrapped up in a nightie. Now you can imagine the US Customs officer in Miami when he asked her to open the bag, and he put his hand in it and found it resting on a sapphire the size of a gentleman's pocket watch. Anyway, eventually, of course, they had to sell the tiara, they needed the money, and Elena complained that it was sold through Cartier, and she complained that it fetched less than its real value, which he estimated at that time to be about £500,000. But it disappeared, probably broken up. Nobody knows what happened to it. It has disappeared. Now, the other tiara which you have seen, Vladimir pearl tiara, Helen certainly had that, and the Greek royal family either was in exile or was about to go into exile, and they needed the money. And she sold it to Queen Mary. Queen Mary, that avid collector of jewels, who knew how to wear them with magnificence. Queen Mary bought it. She actually paid for it. I say that because she has a reputation of not always paying in full for the jewels she acquired from the Romanovs. But she did pay for that. She paid, I think it's £24,000, or it may have been 28, which in today's value is over 2 million. The tiara that by then was a little bit battered. It had lost in its travels 1 or 2 diamonds. It was a bit bashed about. So Mary sent it to Cartier to be repaired. But she sent with it also 15 of what were called the Cambridge emeralds. These were a collection of emeralds which had come down through the Cambridge family. And she sent 15 of them to Cartier, for Cartier to adapt so they could hang in place of the pearls, they could alternate. And there is a picture of the Vladimir tiara with the Cambridge emeralds in it. It's been worn like that by Queen Mary and also by the Crescent Queen. They wore it either with the pearls or with the emeralds. Now I'm going to digress for a moment and tell you the story of the Cambridge emeralds, because that also is fascinating. We have to go back a bit in time. We have to go back, in fact, to George IV, King George IV, eldest son of George III, who had only one child, the Princess Charlotte, heir to the throne. The reason he had only one child is he couldn't stand his wife, and he, I think, probably only spent one night with her. Caroline, who became the Princess of Wales. Anyway, Charlotte was the heir to the throne. She was married young to Leopold of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. She was pregnant with a child, and she died agonizingly in childbirth. It was terrible. She was more than 24 hours in labour. She was delivered of a stillborn son, and the poor girl literally bled to death. Now this caused great consternation in the royal family, because although George IV had many brothers, the royal dukes, they were a dissolute lot, and they were all living with various mistresses. Not one of them had an illegitimate issue. Some of them had lots of other children. The Duke of Clarence, for example, who became William IV, had 10 children by his mistress, the actress Mrs. Jordan. Anyway, all these lads were told that they must ditch their mistresses and get married and produce an heir. The first one to do so, or to produce an heir, was Edward, Duke of Kent, who married Leopold of Saxe-Coburg's sister. She was already a widow, and together they produced Victoria. They were the first past the post. The others all had to get married. A younger one, the Duke of Cambridge, did so to a German princess. And they were living at that time in Hanover. You must remember that Hanover then was a part of the British Crown. We had to give it up, or Victoria had to give it up when she came to the throne, because under Salic law only a male could inherit the throne of Hanover. But there they were. And one day the Duchess went on a trip to Frankfurt, and while she was there, she bought a lottery ticket in a state-run lottery for charity. And she won. Now, that might have been fixed, I don't know. But she did win. And what did she win? She won a small wooden box. And inside that wooden box were 40 cabochons, that's again smooth, finished emeralds of various sizes, which had once belonged to some Eastern potentate. How they got to Frankfurt, I have no idea. But she won them, and thereafter they were known as the Cambridge Emeralds. With the accession of Queen Victoria, the Cambridges returned to England, where they had several children, including a daughter, Princess Mary Adelaide. She didn't marry until she was 34, because they had difficulty finding her own husband. In the end, they found a German princeling, issue of an organic marriage, Duke of Teck, and she married him, and incidentally was the mother of Princess May of Teck, who became Queen Mary. And it was she who inherited the Cambridge emeralds, and although it's a black and white photograph, I do assure you that those stones across her ample chest are indeed the Cambridge emeralds. Now, when she died, she did not leave them to her daughter, as you might have expected. She left them to her favourite son. He was a bachelor, Prince Francis, called Frank of Teck. He was a bachelor, fairly carefree bachelor by the sound of things. He had a mistress, he was unmarried, he had a mistress, Lady Kilmorey, who was the wife of an Irish peer, and he promptly gave her the emeralds. A year later, in 1909, very suddenly, he died, young. His funeral, incidentally, was the only occasion when Mary was ever seen to weep in public. Anyway, next year, 1910, she and George were crowned. She became Queen Mary, and she lost no time in wresting back the emeralds from Lady Kilmorey. Whether she paid for them or not, I don't know, but get them back she did. Lady Kilmorey was left with one brooch. Now Mary, as I told you, had them, 15 of them made to hang in the Vladimir Tiara, and the others made into necklaces, which he wore. And here is a photograph, both of her and Her Majesty the Queen, both wearing the Vladimir Tiara with the emeralds, and both wearing round their necks jewels containing the Cambridge emeralds. As you see, Queen Mary was no slouch. She certainly knew how to wear jewels. Right, now we leave the Romanov jewels and go on to the second lady whose tiara has finished up with the Queen. And this is a lady called the Honourable Mrs. Greville. But actually she was no lady. In fact, with the circumstances of her birth, she was not acceptable ordinarily in middle-class circles because she was illegitimate. She was the illegitimate daughter of a millionaire brewer, Walter McEwen. McEwen's beers still exist, and his parlour maid. Not particularly well favoured. She had a sallow skin, deep-set eyes, strong jaw, frizzy hair. And her parents didn't marry until she was 20, when they all moved to London. But Walter took the precaution of letting everybody know that his daughter, Margaret, would inherit his wealth. So it wasn't difficult to find a suitable husband for her. And that was the Honourable Ronald Greville, Tory MP, son of the second Baron Greville, friend of royalty, easygoing chap. He married, and with her wealth, they entered London society. Her father left her 65 million, which is even today a lot of money. So with their wealth, they moved into society. They had a country house, Poleston Lacey, and where they entertained royally. Margaret was a classic snob, so probably was he. They were known behind their backs as the Grovels. She collected royalty with the same determination, avid determination, that she collected diamonds, Fabergé, Meissen porcelain, objet d'art, whatever. She turned Poleston Lacey there's a picture of it, elegant house. She turned it into a jewel box in which any passing monarch or royalty or Maharaja would gladly spend a couple of nights. She entertained at Poleston Lacey. He died, 1909, he died, young of cancer, but she continued. She was the force, she had the money. And she entertained at Poleston Lacey Edward VII. He was getting on a bit by then. She had an excellent table and cellar, and dear old Tum Tum liked his grub. And she also had the presence of mind to make friends with an eye to the future, with his daughter-in-law Mary, with whom she went shopping. And so she progressed. People loved to go to her parties, but behind her back, they said unkind things about her. She was very unpopular, she had a sharp tongue. Some of the things that were said behind her back were fat, poisonous slug, and another one, I'd sooner have an open sewer running down my drawing room than Mrs. Ronald Greville. But she didn't care, she went on. Her only problem was that when Mary came to the throne, Mary and George came to the throne, the then Prince of Wales, Edward, later become Duke of Windsor, detested her. He really did not like her. So she cultivated his shy brother instead, the Duke of York, who was then about to marry Elizabeth Bowes-Lyons. And she invited them to spend their honeymoon at Poleston Lacey, and indeed they did spend part of their honeymoon there, and there is a photograph of them both in the grounds of Poleston Lacey. She promised to leave it to them, but of course in the interim came the abdication, and they became king and queen, and they didn't need Poleston Lacey. Incidentally, you can imagine the joy of Mrs. Greville at the abdication to find that she had indeed backed the right horse. But when she died, 1942, she left her entire jewel collection to Queen Elizabeth. And very substantial it was. And I want to read you at this stage, in full, a letter, charming note, which was written by Queen Elizabeth to her mother-in-law, Queen Mary. I must tell you that Mrs. Greville has left me her jewels, though I am keeping that quiet for the moment. She left them to me with her loving thoughts, dear old thing, and I feel very touched. I don't suppose I shall see what they consist of for a long time, owing to the slowness of lawyers, death duties, etc. But I know she had a few good things. Apart from everything else, it's rather exciting to be left something. And I do admire beautiful stones with all my heart. I can't help thinking most women do. Now, Queen Mary, ever acquisitive where jewels were concerned, might have expected Mrs. Greville to leave her diamonds, all, or at least some of them, to her. And what this note says between the lines is, she didn't leave them to you, she left them to me. They're mine. In fairness to Mrs. Greville at this stage, I must tell you that she left very generous legacies to every single one of her servants. Perhaps she did that because she was herself the daughter of a parliament. Now, poor George VI didn't know what to do about this bequest of diamonds, coming as they did from a subject, and also the war was on. So they were consigned to the vaults and didn't see the light of day for a while. Then after he died, the Queen Mother, let me digress a moment to say what they consisted of. They consisted of a tiara, which at that made by Boucheron, which at that stage looked rather like a jewelled wastepaper basket. There was a magnificent ruby and diamond collar, also made by Boucheron. There were two really exquisite sets of diamond earrings, which incidentally I saw at the diamond exhibition in Buckingham Palace of the Queen's diamonds. And there was also, I believe, a necklace of emeralds and diamonds, supposedly belonging one time to Marie Antoinette, and other goodies. Anyway, come George VI's death, the end of the war. After the end of the war, George VI's death, the Queen Mother, as she then was, sent the tiara to Boucheron to have them alter it. And here is a photograph of both tiaras, the before and after. And I think you will agree that the after is a vast improvement. It's a truly regal tiara, almost a crown. And the Queen Mother, in her widowhood, into her old age, frequently, almost always, wore this tiara. And there is another photograph of the Queen Mother, now a very old lady in this photograph, wearing the tiara. When she died, she left it to the Queen. Now, the Queen doesn't share the magpie instincts of her grandmother, Queen Mary, and she has plenty of tiaras in any case. So she's unlikely to wear this one. The person who does wear it, and with great aplomb, is Camilla, Duchess of Cornwall. And here's a photograph of her wearing it. Looks very fine. Now I come to the last of the tiaras, and one which has not seen the light of day for quite a while, and that is the Fife tiara. There it is, splendid, made at the end of the 19th century by a Parisian jeweller, Oscar Massim, and bought by the newly elevated Duke of Fife to give as a gift to his bride, Princess Louise, the then Princess Royal, the eldest daughter of Edward VII and Queen Alexandra. Fife was not royal, he'd been an earl, and Queen Victoria elevated him to a dukedom, saying, he's not royal, but he's very, very rich. It appears to have been a happy marriage. Louise was intensely shy, and so was an escape from court life. They had 3 children. There was a stillborn son, and then 2 daughters, Alexandra and Maud. And when it was realised that there wouldn't be a male heir, Victoria issued a special prerogative allowing the title to proceed down the female line. Louise also was delicate. She needed to spend the winters in a warmer climate, and the Fife family used to go to Egypt. And it was on a voyage back from one of these sojourns in Egypt that they were shipwrecked very dramatically off the coast of Morocco. They were all saved, but poor old Duke, 18 years older than the Duchess, died a month later. Eventually the title passed to the eldest daughter, Alexandra, who became Duchess of Fife in her own right. And she wore the Fife tiara had two coronations, George VI in 1937 and the Queen's coronation, when was it, 1952 or 54, I can't remember, but anyway, she wore it at the two coronations. She's better known, or was better known, as Princess Arthur of Connaught. Although she was Duchess of Fife, she married her cousin, Prince Arthur of Connaught, who was the son of the Duke of Connaught, a younger son of Queen Victoria. They had a son, Alistair, who on his father's death became the second Duke of Connaught and was heir to the Dukedom of Fife. He died aged 28 on active service during the war. I say active service with inverted commas. He was at the time acting as ADC for his kinsman, the Earl of Athlone. He was in Canada, acting as kinsman, as ADC to his kinsman, the Earl of Athlone, incidentally brother to Queen Mary, and he fell out of a window, drunk, one night. Nobody knew, and they found him the following morning in the snow, dead of hypothermia. So that was the end of the Connaught dukedom, and he didn't live to inherit the Fife dukedom. That passed to Alexandra's nephew. Her sister had predeceased her. That passed to Alexandra's nephew, Duke of Fife, and with it, one presumes, the Tiara, the Duke of Fife. And that Duke of Fife died very recently. He died in June 2015. Now, it's possible that the Fife tiara may indeed have been sold, or that it may be sold because the present Duke will have to meet quite heavy estate duties. And it would be a tremendous pity if this very lovely, exceptionally lovely, I might say, tiara were lost from view or broken up. It ought really, I think, to be back with the royal family. Now, it just occurs to me, if there is any member of my audience with $1 million or $2 million to spare, maybe he or she would like to make an offer to the present Duke of Fife to buy the tiara in order to return it to the royal family, where there is an excellent candidate waiting to wear it. Kate, Duchess of Cambridge, because one must remember that when Charles comes to the throne, as we expect he will one day, William and Kate will be the new Prince and Princess of Wales, and she will need such a tiara. So I leave you there with that thought. One postscript, one more photograph. One royal lady liked her tiara so much, she used to wear it in the bath, and there she is.